Welcome to the Joyful Mate podcast. Join your joyful journey mentor, Anthony Harcher, as we explore the path to inner joy and fulfillment. Each episode will dive into the science of happiness, share personal insights, and invite you to be part of this interactive book writing adventure. Let's embark on this joyful journey together. Tune in and let's make happiness a part of your everyday. This is my journal of thoughts on happiness in relation to my book that I'm going to create in 2025, Me&My Happiness. I had a moment yesterday where I happened to see a whale breach, and it was like amazing breach of the water. Basically, the whole whale was out of the water, and it looked amazing. Looked somewhat surreal, because looking out my beach in Coogee, I often do not see a whale so close breaching, and it just reminded me of my book. And when I think about happiness, it's something that comes and goes, just like the whale breaching. So yesterday, there was a number of people that saw the breach and then waited and waited and waited for another breach to come. And I think that's what happens in today's society, is that we have a moment of happiness and then we're waiting for the next moment of happiness. And that's how we've been evolved in terms of our human evolution, is that happiness is a fleeting occurrence. It's not something that's permanent. And we, for example, around survival and food, we want food, we need food, and there's a feeling of happiness when we have food in front of us that we desire. And the hunger is created, the hunger for more of that is created through the absence. And so, in actual fact, it's the gap, the period that we don't have happiness creates the fulfillment of happiness. And what happens in society is that we think that we should again, it's imposed by beliefs that we should have happiness all the time, that we should always be happy. But that's so far from the truth, and it's the happiness trap that people fall a victim to, is that they think if they're not constantly happy, then that's not fair. That's not the way life should be. And again, it's a fantasy that is being created, that we have a one-sided life, that things should always be one-sided. But in actual fact, how the universe has been created is to keep things in balance, to keep this state of conservation. And so we need sadness in order to feel happiness. So if we didn't know what sadness was, then we've got nothing to compare as to what happiness is. So it's really important that we don't see it as something that's permanent, that we see it as something that's transient. And it's the gap that makes, when happiness appears and all the stars align, that we feel this incredible sense of fulfillment or achievement or accomplishment. However, what often happens is that we have a fantasy as to what happiness should be, and it's a one-sided perspective in terms of, when all these things happen, then I'll be happy. And the way in which the world works, it's a very dynamic state. It's constantly moving and shifting and changing. And so the probability of everything aligning and that vision of your happiness to just appear, it is a low probability. And so I think the other point I want to make around happiness is that if we get attached to a particular form of happiness, that I'll be happy if this happens, then there's a probability that it might happen and a probability that it won't. So there's an element of uncertainty. And it may never happen. It may happen. But we ultimately can't control everything in order for all the stars to align. And so it's much better to not have an attachment as to what happiness looks or what it should be. I think it's much better to have this dynamic version of happiness. Is not a set form, not fixed, but variable. That way you can experience more versions of happiness and feel more fulfilled and content. So what do I mean by this? So when we have a fixation that it's got to be this way, then we're attached to a certain form and we're only looking for that form. So we're consciously searching. Our reticular activating system is switched on to finding that form. And it's a hard form to find. As I said, it's low probability, lots of uncertainty, and hence you feel this long gap between when you're last happy and to when you'll next be happy. Whereas happiness is always around us, always in different forms. And I think what we don't want to be is fixated on a particular form of happiness. We want to allow it to be transformative and to express itself in different ways. That way, there's a higher probability that you'll experience more momentarily forms of happiness and more spontaneity and more everyday. So that consciousness awareness is not fixated on a particular form. It's allowing it to manifest in different forms. And I think that's what really helps life be more fulfilling and contentment, is that you're allowing yourself to be more adaptive, more transformative. Like you could take an example such as COVID. Certain people had holidays and big events planned, and that they were looking forward to. That was their version of bringing some happiness and momentarily happiness whilst they were doing the event or traveling on holidays. Well, no one did the home. And so that was a huge, or a low probability, but it happens. And you can imagine all the people that experienced all that, the fixated form that they were looking for happiness in was just taken away from them. And that created a bigger gap in a sense that they didn't know when the next form of happiness, or when, because they were fixated on that particular form of happiness, they were waiting for COVID to pass in order to feel happy or experience happiness again. Whereas all throughout COVID, they could have experienced happiness if they allowed happiness to be variable, transformative, and not fixed. So that's really important, is that we don't fixate ourselves on a version of happiness and what happiness looks like. We allow it to be just expressed. And I think this is a much more fulfilling path, rather than the trap that we get into that, once I pay off my mortgage, I'll be happy. Because what happens is when you pay off your mortgage, you experience momentarily happiness, but it doesn't last. And it's not meant to last. As I said before, otherwise we wouldn't have survived as a species. we wouldn't have evolved, because what happens is that we need the hunger in order to drive us and to motivate us. And it's the same as happiness. We need it to disappear in order to crave it and desire it. And hence why we feel so fulfilled once we achieve what we're setting out to achieve, or but it really requires you to know the direction, know what your values are, because at the end of the day, you want something that fulfills you. Otherwise, you're chasing someone else's dreams, and you arrive there and think, oh, this is not what I thought it would be. I'll give you an example. I recently had a client who was very low self-esteem, quite depressed, and low self-worth. And what they were fixated on is their body and not being how they wanted it to be. So they had this very much fixation on what they wanted in terms of the ideal body, and that would bring them fulfillment, happiness. And then I actually asked them the question. I said, well, I'll give you a magic wand and you can transform into that experience. And this is me working on dissolving their fantasy, because they just thought it would be all good, would be all positive, and that therefore happiness, they'd be forever happy. However, when I gave them the magic wand and allowed them to transform themselves momentarily into the body that they wanted, I then asked them, what are the undesirables? What is what you wouldn't like about having this body? And they reflected on it, and they said, I'd get unwanted attention. I don't like sexual attention. And I would get a lot of that if I had this body, because this is what this body attracts, is a lot of sexual attention. And they think, oh, no, I just wouldn't like that at all. And I could see a significant shift in them realizing their conscious awareness was only aware of the upside of having that body, but unconsciously there was always the downside, but they chose to fixate themselves and create a fantasy on having that body. And once I got them to find what was unconscious and bring it to their conscious awareness, they then realized that, no, I don't think I want that at all. That's not what I want. And I know what their values are, and they want attention in another area. They want attention in terms of their superpower. And so my client has a superpower in 3D art, and that's where she would like attention. That's desirable attention for her, because that's her superpower, and she wants to get it known and create a difference in that space. So that gives her meaning and purpose. And so that is much desirable attention that she would like, as opposed to this thinking that I want a great body and then attract all this unwanted attention around sexual interests. So that was a real eye-opener for my clients, in terms of thinking that, yeah, I had a fantasy around how I wished I, looked. And then I saw the other side. I was made consciously aware of the other side. And therefore, once I knew the completeness of what it would be like, saw both sides of it, I thought, no, it's not aligned to who I am. And so I've certainly now got her back on focusing on what her priorities are. And her priorities is to build her credibility, reputation, and be known for her 3D artwork. The other thing that brings to my attention is a story from my upbringing, where it was challenging when I was young, is because particularly around that age where people are wanting to build a relationship with the opposite sex. And so that initial attraction is all on the physical and the way you look. And I, throughout my childhood years, have been told how ugly I was, and that I was not desirable, and the only person that would love me would be I had a face that only a mother could love. And so that sort of played in my back of my mind, and then I believed that the only way people that get attracted is physically. However, in time, I've realized that more physical form of attraction is more that sexual. So it's more that transient form of desire. It's that more survival to mate and to fulfill sexual desires. And so it's temporarily. Whereas ultimately I was looking more for longer term companionship. And so that it was actually a good thing in a way, that I didn't have that that would have attracted the relationships that I did once, ultimately. So that wouldn't have been fulfilling because it's not aligned with who I am. So, and the other blessing that gave me was I didn't have the outer beauty, but I then decided, well, and that's where I've centered my attention, and I'm constantly working on that inner beauty, become a better person. And that's been a constant search of mine throughout my life, is how can I improve with what I've got? And so having that knowledge or awareness that I was physically unattractive, I couldn't change that. So it didn't take me long to think just to accept the way it is, and then to focus on things that I could control. And obviously the way I see the world and what I understand, and how to create and be a better in relationships, and that's what I focused on, was my empowerment, my education, and hence why I'm at a point now where I've got a lot to share, and I've got a podcast, because I've been curious about this whole thing around mental health as a result of losing a friend who I played football with when I was 18. And what I saw back then was someone that had everything, that was at the top of his rugby league. I loved rugby league at the time. He was a great player. He was Central Coast Player of the Year, and had obviously a lot of promise in terms of his rugby league potential and sporting talents. And that was something I admired back then. I loved my sport, and I wanted to create a career in sport. That was my desire as a kid growing up. And so I looked up for anyone that was doing amazing things in that space. And I was taken back when I heard that he had taken his life. I was thinking, well, I thought he had everything together. I thought that, but that was my perspective. But his perspective was completely different, that he didn't have things together. He wasn't fulfilling his goals. And one of his major goals was to get into the Navy. And he had several knockbacks from the Navy. He couldn't get in. And I think that really set him back. And he felt very unfulfilled and lost a lot of self-worth. And but I never saw that side of things. I just saw my version of events in terms of, he had what I wanted, but he didn't have what he wanted. And so this really got me a better understanding why, it got me interested in human behavior, why we do what we do. And this is part of writing this book, is because I've developed a great knowledge base and understanding of why humans do what they do. And as a result of this, I'm writing this book. So I'm really excited to be starting this first book of mine. It's a sense of something that's been long playing in the back of my mind, and I'm bringing it to fruition finally. So I'm really, really excited, at the same time a bit nervous, as I'm not a great writer. So probably why I'm recording this audio. And for me, I'm better with thinking through my thoughts, verbalize. I don't really verbalize them, I more internalize my thoughts, but this is encouraging me to verbalize. My note taker's now writing it, and I'll then look to correct it and make it flow better. But this is certainly me on my first journey. What's today? The 8th of November, 2024. I've started, and I've always seen as whatever you want to fix, whatever you want to create in the new year, to start it before the new year, to build momentum, so that when you enter the new year, you're well and truly created
habits. And that's what I encourage around, once you understand what's important to you and meaningful, is that you set objectives. Objective being you understand there's a upside and a downside to what you're pursuing, but ultimately it's taking you in the direction that you are going. One understand downsides. So for me, like, what's the downside of writing a book? And so rather than create it as a book for me, it's going to be all about you. So that's probably about it in terms of what I wanted to, how I wanted to start. I just wanted to make a start. I wanted to get some thoughts down. I'm going to continue to do this, and I might do another recording shortly, but I just need to recollect my thoughts and start talking about this concept of happiness.